All right, good morning, dear students. Welcome to yet another discussion that we are going to have. As promised, as part of my lecture video series, we are going to talk about the lessons that we have discussed already. So I hope that this will help you in terms of navigating through Unit 1. I will first talk about Lesson 3, Literary Reading Through a Linguistic Context, given that this is the most recent lesson that we are taking up for this unit. Now, in this particular lesson, we are going to talk about the usage of language in terms of comprehending a particular literary text. So I want you to remember the objectives that we have in place. First, we need to differentiate the various literary approaches that focus on language. Secondly, we need to analyze a literary text by examining its socio-cultural context. Let's begin. I want you to remember this very essential question as we go along with our discussion. What is the importance of understanding the way language is used in a particular text? Nganong importante man makaibaw ta how language is used in a particular literary text. So let's begin. But before we proceed with our discussion, let's first decode these vocabulary words that we are going to encounter as we go along with our discussion. First, linguistic. Linguistic is an adjective that means of or relating to language or the study of language. Kung moingon ganitag linguistic, it is always the key term is the study of language. Example, linguistic factors play a crucial role in understanding layers of meaning in a text. Second, syntax, the study of how linguistic elements form phrases, clauses, or sentences. Example, one of the criteria in checking your written assignment is syntax. Giunsa nimo, right? The pieces and parcels of forming your the different linguistic elements, the phrases, the clauses, the sentences, how it is arranged, how it is organized. We also have structuralism. Structuralism class is a noun that means literary theory that examines text to a larger structure. Example, using structuralism as my approach, I will attempt to analyze the cask of Amontillado as part of the horror genre. Structuralism talks about a particular literary piece. In this example, it is the cask of Amontillado that is going to be related to a particular or a larger structure. In this case, a horror genre. So the cask of Amontillado will be analyzed if it is part of or how it is part of the horror genre. So one siya structuralism. We also have formalism. Formalism is a noun that means a school of literary theory focused on structure, through which a text is examined without exterior influences. Example, formalism is usually the first approach taught to students when dealing with literature. Meaning to say, formalism, in the word itself, in the formal aspect, is going to focus on the structure of the literary text, right? It does not really conform to exterior influences such as genre or other categories. Lastly, we have post-structuralism. Post-structuralism is a noun which means a school of literary theory that examines underlying structures in a text that may have varied interpretations. Example, post-structuralism began as a response to structuralism. We will be discussing and expounding these vocabulary words as we go along our discussion for this lesson, right? Let's now proceed. Here are the reasons why we need to read literature through the linguistic context. First, reading the text on its own, regardless of the author's biography or sociocultural context, may help you understand the literary text through just analyzing the words, sentences, patterns, imagery, so on and so forth, etc. of the text. Meaning to say, when we are going to talk about reading a literary text through the linguistic context, we do not anymore touch on the biographical aspect or who the author is, the author's life, and its influences on the author's work. We also don't talk about the sociocultural context. We don't discuss anymore about social classes, those who are in power, those who are not in power, all those things. We just simply analyze the words used in that literary text, the sentences, the patterns, the imagery that it is trying to paint in our minds, etc., etc., etc. We also need to analyze the literary text's grammar, syntax, or phonemic pattern. that may help us find the meaning of the text within its form and help you interpret it by simply analyzing the content of the literary work. Meaning to say, if you're going to use linguistic context in terms of reading a literary text or literature, you don't go with the exterior factors. Hence, you only focus on the content of the text. You only focus on what the author is trying to convey, not anymore on the other aspects such as the biographical or the socio-cultural, the classes in that the social classes in that particular text. Now, what are the strategies that we need to incorporate in reading a text through the linguistic context? First, diction. We need to analyze the choices of words in that particular text. We need to identify what is the syntax, no, or examine the syntax, the use of sentences, clauses, phrases, so on and so forth. We also need to be observant of the usage of figurative language, the metaphors, the ironies, right? We also need to analyze the mood and the tone of the text. What is it trying to convey us? Is it something sad, hopeful, optimistic, pessimistic, sadistic? And we also need to talk about the overall structure of the text. And lastly, most importantly, analyze the content of the text. You need to become critical readers and apply critical thinking, in terms of trying to decode, analyzing the content of that particular text. Now, what are some guide questions in reading through linguistic context? First, is there any striking word or striking words that is appealing to you, that is unfamiliar, that attracts your attention, or words that are dramatic incorporated in this particular text? Is there any? If there are, then you need to identify those and you need to find its meaning, find how it impacts, right? How it impacts a particular literary text. You also need to talk about the nouns. Are the nouns concrete or abstract? Are these verbs, right? What are the common words used by the author? What are those words that keep on repeating in that particular literary text? And how does it form pieces and parcels of the meaning of the text? You also need to talk about the order of the sentence. Go back to the basics: subject, predicate, dependent and independent clauses. You need to restructure the sentence or the phrase in which you are able to see if there is a difference or there is no difference at all. Is the voice active or passive? What's the rhythm of the sentence structure, right? In relation to the length of the sentences or the lines. That's something that is also very important. You also need to talk about the literary devices. Are there images painted in your mind through these literary devices? And if so, what are those devices trying to paint? What are the images trying to paint by those, right? Is there any other meaning incorporated aside from the literal meaning of the images painted in your mind? Right now, what is the tone? When you talk about the tone, it is mostly related to the emotion that is being presented or depicted in a particular literary text. We also need to talk about the structure, right? Whose point of view is it? Is it a narrative? Is it linear or non-linear? If it is a poem, what type of poem is it? Is it a sonnet or is it a different category or a different type? You need to talk about that as well. You need to consider that. That is why when we talk about linguistic context, as I have said, we do not touch anymore on the link or the external factors, but we focus on the content or the text itself, right? Now, let's now discuss the notes before reading a text through the linguistic context. Class, always remember that some writers may not follow grammatical rules all the time. And this is a deviation that we can use in our analysis. We need to understand that authors or writers will not always coincide, right, with grammatical rules as they are given their artistic freedom. The characteristics of language in which the text was written may help us in analyzing the text. So we also need to become well versed of in terms of language. And most of all, there are different literary approaches that a particular language may be focused on. What are these literary approaches? Let's talk about them. First, structuralism. What is structuralism? Structuralism needs or helps us relate the text that we are trying to examine to a larger structure. Just like in the example given in decoding vocabulary words, a particular literary piece, right, is being categorized to a particular genre or to a particular larger text or larger structure, that it could be categorized, right? Formalism. Formalism, on the other hand, is a school of literary criticism and literary theory that focuses on the structure of a particular text. We already know what we are talking about when we talk about the structure, the usage of language, right? The order of the sentences, is it linear or is it non-linear, right? All those things are being discussed when we talk about formalism. So that is basically what we need to remember when we say or when we talk about the approach formalism or new criticism. It focuses on the structure of the text per se. Post-structuralism, on the other hand, is a in the linguistic context, it may be different in terms of the underlying structure based on different interpretations, but ultimately, right, we still study how the words or phrases were used in the text. It's just that as a response to structuralism, post-structuralism now talks about not relating a particular text to a larger structure, but instead crafting, right, different interpretations and underlying structures. Example, if we are trying to examine and analyzing how the cask of Amontillado relates to the horror genre as a larger structure, post-structuralism doesn't abide with that particular context or concept. It means that a particular literary piece or a literary text could become pieces and parcels of different genres. The Cask of Amontillado could become horror, could become romantic, could become sci-fi, could become thriller, investigative. It could be part pieces and parcels of a larger structure. Compared to the point made of structuralism that it only belongs to or relates to a larger structure. Why is there a post-structuralism and why is it called post-structuralism? Diba? Sabi nga, it is a response to structuralism. Therefore, it is now the understanding or the literary approach after the approach structuralism. All right. So after understanding the literary approach of structuralism, we now go and talk about post-structuralism that opposes key points of the literary approach structuralism. If it's structuralism, it is relating to only a larger structure, meaning to say only one. Post-structuralism is talking about different interpretations, underlying structures that lead to or may have different interpretations. All right. Now, since we have discussed already the poem Hope is the Thing with Feathers by Emily Dickinson, I will now go directly to our values integration for this lesson. Also thinking and assuming that you have already answered the assessments of this particular lesson. We have learned how the use of language can be closely examined in order to find layers of meaning. How can the knowledge and understanding of language use help us understand others better? We've talked about this in the sense that we need to use our understanding of how language is actually utilized in day-to-day context, right? In order for us to understand other people, understand their beliefs, their principles, and how they try to communicate and how they try to manipulate or orchestrate their thoughts with the usage of language. So that is something that is also very, very important. All right. So I hope that you were able to review, right, the discussions that we have with this particular lesson. And I hope to see you in the next video that we will be posting.